a couple of we have several presentations this morning. The agendas are up here if you did not get one. We're going to start out with our DART update. And Scott, do you want to say a few words before?
No, it's actually just an update that we want to
Okay.
get Elizabeth in for.
Elizabeth, it's all yours.
All right. Good morning. I hope everybody had a great weekend, and thank you for the opportunity to present to you this morning and provide an update on some key initiatives that the DART Commission and staff have been working on over the last several months. I first want to start by thanking Josh Mandelbaum and his alternate Mayor County for Josh's significant contribution on the DART Commission. He is a valuable member of our executive committee and has dedicated a significant amount of time finding new efficiencies and exploring ways to make our services more valuable for Central Iowans. So appreciate his service and commitment to DART. As you may recall, the DART Commission was reconstituted in 2017, providing each of DART's member communities with a representative on the Board of Commissioners. Since that time, the DART Commission, along with staff, have invested a considerable amount of time evaluating DART services, operations, and even funding to ensure that we are maximizing the investment of our member communities. As a result, over the last several years, DART has been able to implement two major cost-neutral service changes that provided earlier and later service and more midday service on DART's local routes that primarily serve the city of Des Moines. We also eliminated some underutilized service in some of DART's suburban member communities in order to reinvest those resources to meet transportation needs. We introduced our first mobility on-demand pilot, which eliminated an inefficient fixed route service in Urbandale and replaced it with our Flex Connect, allowing riders within the zone to use Uber or Yellow Cab to and from a DART bus stop. We've also diversified our fleet, purchasing 30-foot buses for shuttle and support routes that don't warrant a 40-foot vehicle. And we've also approved a new funding formula to better align our cost and benefit to DART member communities. And our work isn't done. And so this morning we want to just remind you of some of the services that we have here in the city of Des Moines, how we are planning for the future, talk about our partnerships and some of our other initiatives, as well as talk about funding and our facility project. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Luis Montoya, DART's Chief Planning Officer, to talk a little bit more about our planning.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and good morning, council members. I want to start off by doing just if I can figure this out, a quick overview of the service that we do have. Of course, DART's a regional entity. We have 30 bus routes, plus our rideshare and paratransit service. Those bus routes, most of them do come in and out of Des Moines, with some exceptions. And what we saw over the last, almost 2 years now, was that the services that we have in Des Moines really fared the best in terms of ridership during the pandemic. And that's probably not a surprise when we think about the core services and the people who didn't have the option to work from home. And so when we look at especially our 9 highest ridership routes, which all are in Des Moines, those are the ones that have service 7 days a week, the most frequent routes, and those are the ones that did the best. They're in the areas that have the highest land use density, areas of need, and regional destinations. As Elizabeth mentioned, we have been working to refine our service and to make it as efficient and effective as it can be. We did make some changes so that we could extend service hours over the last few years. So now we're in the process of looking towards the future, and I'm going to touch a little bit on some recommendations that we have for improving our service, but there was actually an article in the Business Record that I would point you to if you want to go a little bit more in depth. They did spend quite a bit of time with us, and they covered it in pretty good detail, I think. So in early 2020, we started a project that we call the Transit Optimization Study. And the direction from the DART Commission was to come up with a long-range vision for DART that really looks at the service today and making sure that we're doing the most with the resources that we have. Also look at the evolving needs of the region, in particular how our region is growing, and now, as we've gotten into it further, how our travel patterns are changing. And also look at our service model. Can we introduce new service types, even partnerships with the private sector, leverage technology in order to meet those regional needs and bring it all together in a long-term vision for DART services. Of course, we started that in early 2020. Pretty quickly, things changed for all of us, and we had to respond to the pandemic, begin our recovery. It did give us an opportunity to look at not just the pre-pandemic, ridership, but also how things have evolved. And as I mentioned, in particular, as it relates to Des Moines and our busiest routes, those are the routes that fared the best. When we look at ridership, ridership did drop off by about half in 2020. It's now gained, a lot of that, not all of that back. We're operating at about 65% of ridership, but some routes are 80% of their pre-pandemic ridership. So it really just does depend on who's riding, what are the needs that it serves. But even beyond those pandemic impacts, when we looked at ridership, we looked at actually just general travel patterns where people drive and bike, et cetera. We did a pretty extensive survey with our riders and the general public. And what we heard was that there's a need for better connection between housing and jobs, especially as we look at a regional transit system and we look at how jobs are growing throughout the region, in particular lower wage jobs, and making sure that we have connections between where people can get a job and where they can afford to live. And increasingly we see that our network needs to evolve in order to meet those needs. We also heard from many member communities a desire for more local transit, not just the regional trips that go across the region and into the downtown business district, but really that more local needs as well. Customers also asked for more flexibility. If you think about, some of our bus routes run once an hour. And if you're somebody who drives a car and, if you had only the flexibility to have your garage door open and close once an hour, that would really limit your mobility. And that's what it's like if somebody relies on a bus that only comes once an hour. And so people are really looking for more flexibility, not only for that time of day, and also where they can go so that they can get where they need to be when they need to get there. And then also, of course, as I mentioned, some of our fixed routes are doing quite well, and we want to build on that. So I'm going to start with some near-term service proposals. I'm going to go into a little bit of detail. I'm not going to be able to cover everything. Happy to take questions. I know Elizabeth also passed out a kind of a spiral-bound booklet that has everything in it. It has all the recommendations. It has maps. I would invite you to look at that, and but also ask any questions. So the first set of recommendations that we came up with as we thought about those regional needs are cost neutral. And this was really the charge from the commission was do the most with what you have. And so we've identified a few routes that are underperforming, that have low ridership, especially relative to the amount of cost that it takes to provide that service. And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to come up with alternatives that could still meet the same need. Our objective wasn't to just leave people without a ride, but could we evolve the service? Could we make it run by the private sector, or change it to an on-demand solution? Or even just ask people to ride a different route that is nearby. If we could do some of those things, could we actually reuse those resources and expand and try to meet those other needs that I mentioned, more local service, connections between jobs, et cetera. And so we did come up with 4 recommendations, and we're calling them near-term recommendations because they're things that we hope to pursue in the next year or two, and because they are cost neutral from a DART operating budget perspective. They're listed over on the right. They're in Ankeny, Urbandale and Grimes, West Des Moines, and Altoona. The Altoona recommendation, I don't have a map of that one, but I'll just touch on, that does affect Des Moines, because what we would be doing is we would be reinvesting in Route 17, which is the route that goes along Hubble, goes from DART Central Station out along Hubble to Altoona. We would reinvest the express service into that local service, because that route, the Route 17, is doing very well, and the express route that comes into downtown from Altoona has lost quite a bit of ridership, and so we would, in that case, we would be investing in a route that serves Des Moines and its residents. But just a little bit more detail on some of those more flexible options that we are introducing or expanding. The first is a proposal well, it's really more than a proposal. This is something that we are going to implement in Ankeny. DART on Demand was something that rose to the top pretty early on in our process, and we decided to pursue it here actually starting in 2 weeks. And so what it is, it's taking an existing service where people have to call DART a day ahead of time and schedule their trip anywhere within a zone, and that zone covers most of Ankeny. We think that we can leverage technology to outfit our vehicles with a similar technology as like Uber or Lyft use, where somebody can pull out their mobile phone, see where the vehicle is, book it. The vehicle gets automatically dispatched to where they are, takes them where they need to be. So that uses a similar resource in that we already have this service here, but it enhances it by providing it that on-demand technology. And that's something that we have proposals to do in a few different places in the region. It really makes the most sense where demand is low, because if you think about it, having a vehicle that has to, go around to all the individual locations isn't the most efficient way. The most efficient way is to have everybody walk to where the vehicle is, where the bus stop is. But in these places of low demand, we think that we can really meet some unmet needs, and so we've targeted for our first one in Ankeny. The next is in Urbandale and Grimes, where we have a route that, again, it was not doing well before the pandemic, and of course has seen ridership that hasn't bounced back like a lot of our other routes have. And so we're looking at replacing it with an Uber and taxi zone, and this is similar to what we launched in 2019. Actually, on the right, you can see the zone, the 2019 zone, which does cover a part of Des Moines around Merle Hay Mall, and then goes into Urbandale. We would really mimic that into a larger zone that touches Urbandale and Grimes, mostly providing access to jobs up that way. If you think about the business parks, and increasingly, I know Amazon has a distribution center up there, and different facilities.
So the DART, can you go
Yeah,
back?
please.
The DART on Demand?
Yeah.
Do you always have, is that a paratransit up there? Do you always have that there? So what happens if they would have to come to Des Moines and you would need another one there?
Right, so the way it works is it only operates within that zone, and it is that bus that you see pictured.
Okay.
There could be a future in which we use like a smaller van or something, kind of depends on the demand, but it only goes within that zone. So part of the reason for doing it is that it can help people get to those routes that do come into Des Moines. So up in Ankeny, there's 2 routes that come into Des Moines, and so the hope is that we're actually expanding the hours. I forgot to mention that. So we're expanding the hours so that it's 6 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. So now hopefully people can use it to commute and to connect to those routes that come into town.
Okay. And then the Flex Connect, are you only looking at doing just that route, or can you do it throughout the metro?
Right now, that's the near-term proposal. We do have proposals for other areas. This is the one where we could actually remove a route and replace it. The other ones that we have identified are not removing a route, and so it just comes with increased cost.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll show a map, and if you like, I can highlight those other locations where we've identified it.
Increased cost if you removed a route and you used cab, Lyft?
No, this would be probably, we modeled it at cost neutral because we think more people will ride, but this one is cost neutral. There's other areas where we have it proposed that would be an increased cost because they're not eliminating a route.
We keep the route plus additional services like this.
Yes, in other places. Yeah, in this one, it was just the underperforming route.
The fee the same for the rider?
So in the Flex Connect model, so we have one right now, and it's actually free for the customer because we don't want people to have to pay twice, to have to pay to get, it's subsidized certainly, but even if it was a low price to get on their Uber, and then they have to pay to get on DART, the whole purpose is to get them onto DART, and so right now we have it modeled as free. We do have to figure out what we do for that because it probably is not sustainable for it to always be free. The DART on Demand model, the model operated by DART, that one as well, we're figuring out what the fare is. Part of the pilot is try to see what kind of price people respond to. We want to have it low enough so that people ride, but not so low that the demand is unattainable.
So basically, in Ankeny and the DART demand, you could go from one place in Ankeny to another place depending, but you would pay. But if you would want to go from Ankeny and get on the DART bus, it would not be 2 charges?
Correct. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and that's just because you're already on a DART bus, so that the transfers
Right.
and everything work. Yeah.
And the Dart on Demand only takes you to another Dart bus to transfer, or will
Nope,
it take you?
anywhere in the zone.
Anywhere in the zone?
Anywhere in the zone,
Okay.
Uh-oh. Of course I did that. This way. So those were the cost neutral improvements. They're relatively limited. There's just 4 of them because, as I mentioned, you know, we were trying to find things that could be enhancements for customers cost neutrally. There's only so much that you can squeeze out of a turnip. But of course, our needs are much greater. We heard from our customers, and we even saw it in the data, that there's, you know, needs for improving weekend service, expanding to growing areas of our region, providing more direct connections so that people don't have to transfer quite as much, and reducing wait and travel times. And so we have really a pretty long list of things that fit into this category. I'm going to touch on a couple of them that have come up as themes that we've heard either from you or from your constituents or from city staff. And then, as I mentioned, there's a complete list in those spiral-bound copies that we provided. So here are some things that really rose to the top. So when we did our public outreach, we asked people actually to rank some of these things, saying that, look, all of these are going to require additional resources in order for us to pursue. But if we did have those resources, if we got a grant or you know, chose to collect more, what would we pursue first? And 2 of the things that rose to the top that I think echo some things that I've certainly heard a lot about are more service along Floor Drive, and that's there on the left. Really, people are looking to see all-day service. Right now, it only has a few trips in the morning and a few trips in the evening, and the demand there is to really see it all day. And we have a proposal to actually split it up into 2 routes because we think it serves kind of 2 different needs. There's an airport business park need that has certain hours, and it could probably be aligned with shift times if it was a different route than the local route that serves the businesses along Floor and the adjacent neighborhoods. Then additionally, there was a proposal in the plan for a new route along East 14th Street. And this is one that has come up as a desire for people to get from south to north and north to south without having to transfer. And so this would be not only a faster route for people going across town, but it would also serve areas that don't have transit service today. And this was something that rose to the top when we asked the public to kind of respond to it. It's an interesting opportunity because right now, I know the DOT is working on a plan for East 14th Street to think about through traffic, I think is a lot of how they think about it, but also I think there are some pretty significant pedestrian safety elements in that, which would be needed for some of these stretches where right now the walking environment isn't the best, but would be important for transit.
Luis, just a quick question.
Yeah, please.
How do you reach out and contact the population that is not currently using DART? I mean, to get the input from the people you'd like to get on the bus, so to speak. How do you reach out to them?
Yeah, they are the hardest group to reach. You know, we've done a lot to communicate with our customers. What we did this time around is that we went to a lot of community events. So we were able to do in-person and virtual things this time. And we did things like farmers markets, where we can just get people, you know, kind of where they're at. We also worked a lot with our human service partners. So people who serve, in particular, communities that are, you know, on different levels of assistance or, you know, new Iowans. And we worked with them to be able to share our materials and to actually go in person and you know, join a monthly meeting of a group in order to help get the word out. As well as, you know, paid, you know, radio. We did like Spanish radio ads, you know, things of that nature. So I touched on some of those nearer term needs that rose to the top. Some other things that are, as we continue to grow, that are identified in the plan are service in kind of the southeast of Des Moines. Of course, there's, you know, additional transportation investments being made in this area, and we know increasingly businesses are moving there. And so even in the past, we've heard requests from different businesses in this area around MLK, East MLK, and Vandalia. And so we wanted to come up with a proposal that we think could meet some of those needs. And so we have this here. It would require a lot of work with those individual employers to try to figure out, the times of day and the exact routing. It's more of a vision to reflect a need that we think there is in our community, especially as we look to the future growth due to the Southeast Connector in this area. And then, of course, there's downtown. We have shown here the pink route is the existing D line that runs every 10 minutes. And then the purple route is the link, which is really a connection between the Center Street parking garage and different destinations downtown. What we really think is that there's a need, probably, especially as more housing is built in the Gray Station and the Market District, to rethink this downtown transit circulation, longer hours in addition to routing. And so in that teal color, we have a sort of proposed routing that we think could be really useful to people who live now and increasingly will be living in these areas. But really, we think it's a mixture of new service and repurposing existing service that'll require some more work to hash out the details. But we did want to make sure it was in our vision as more and more people are living downtown. And so this is how it comes all together in a vision. This includes those near-term proposals as well as the longer term. Our vision is that we want to invest in the routes that are doing well today. We want to introduce new, more flexible options for folks to get where they need to go when they need to get there. And we want to bring it all together with seamless transfers and trip planning. And what I mean by that is the physical infrastructure, so that when somebody's transferring bus routes or when they took an Uber to get to a DART bus route, that there's adequate safe, and it's safe in order to do that. High quality bus stops, and I'll touch on that in a moment, for people to wait in, as well as the technology, so that people can plan their trip increasingly over their mobile device to know, what are my options, how long is it going to take, how much is it going to cost, and then book it directly is the vision, at least. And some of those pieces we have put in place, many of them. So we took those service proposals, and really over the last month or two, we've been doing this public outreach. And what we've heard is that there is a lot of support for weekend service and for some of those new service proposals that I shared, as well as investing in our busiest routes. I didn't touch on it, but one of our proposals is to increase frequency on the busiest routes. Of course, that's a costly endeavor, but we think it's one that ridership would respond to should we identify the resources for it. There are concerns with some of our proposed service reductions, some of those areas where I mentioned that we are proposing to eliminate a bus route, replace it with something else. People have concerns. Ridership is low. It doesn't mean that there's no ridership. It doesn't mean that people won't be asked to change their daily habits. And we're working with them to understand those concerns. And then also in our study, it's important to think beyond the service and also just think about the types of policies that are really supportive of transit. We've been going around to the city councils. We've now hit most of them in our member communities. And, not everyone's always thinking about density around transit corridors. And so we want to make sure that we're emphasizing that the most cost-effective way to provide transit is to develop where transit already exists. And so the more as our region grows, if they can look to our vision of where we think it makes sense to invest in transit, and hopefully we can work together towards that would be the most cost-effective way to serve. And then also complete streets. We're very thankful for our partnership with the City of Des Moines, and I work a lot with city staff on the various projects to improve the streets for everyone, including for transit and transit users. And so we want to try to build that up in all our member communities. And then also that we're keeping in focus what we're trying to achieve. We don't just pull buses out because it's fun. We pull it out because we're serving our region. And so especially as we think about serving the promoting economic prosperity in our region. We think that DART has a big role to play in that, in getting people to work and providing opportunity. So that's our kind of long-range planning. I did want to touch on a few other items that I know are important to the council. The bus shelters, of course, as we've talked about in the past, are a top customer request. Seating as well. I know that trash cans have been a request in the past, and we have been installing more of them, really mostly by request, or sort of where you see the trash start to build up. I know that in the last installment of garage funding that came to DART from the Center Street parking garage, we did identify that trash cans and benches, which I'll touch on, are eligible, and so that's something that we're glad that we can use to expand to meet that need. Benches. So as I believe has come to the council before, DART is interested in taking over the benches from the current advertising contractor. We still have some work to do to understand exactly what that looks like from a feasibility perspective. Not all of the bench locations are going to make sense. The existing locations, I have a photo there of a bench that is on University that doesn't have any sidewalks. And so the choice would be to, add sidewalks, at a considerable cost in order to make it fully ADA accessible, or to not replace the bench there. And so we want to look at ridership, we want to look at costs before we make commitments around how many of these locations we can take over. We would replace it with a DART bench that wouldn't have advertising on it, make sure it's durable, think through the maintenance implications, all those things. And so I have been working with city staff on that, and we appreciate the opportunity to think this through, because I think it'll make a lot of sense, not only at those locations that have the benches today, but there's a lot of other locations, because it is a top request from our customers.
Who has the benches now, if they're not yours?
It's an advertising contract that the city has.
Who gets paid? We do? Or
They
DART
need to,
does?
like, remove the snow, and they get the revenue from the advertisement.
Who remove, the people that are advertising removes the snow?
There's one agency that's responsible for all the ones that have advertisement on them. I don't know the number, Pam is.
It's about 100 locations. You don't know the cost or the revenue? Oh, yeah, I don't know.
Scott, what happens if they don't go? If they don't clean them?
Yeah. If they what?
If they don't clear?
If they don't clear?
Yeah, because that's probably one of the most common complaints I get.
Right. That's why we want to make a different arrangement, because they've not been good, frankly.
Yeah, no, they haven't been
Yeah,
doing that at all.
yeah. The existing program,
No, that hasn't been happening. That's why I had no idea that was owned by someone else. And
Yeah.
so the revenue stream doesn't go back to DART? It goes into our general fund, or what? I guess I'm
Goes
really
to the
confused now.
advertising.
No, I'm not sure. I'll let Pam come up, because she's been working through this.
Sorry, Pam.
It's a very minimal amount.
I can't think it'd generate that much.
They sell
Good morning, Pam Cooksey, Assistant City Manager. The DART doesn't have responsibility for the creative outdoor advertising contract. That's a city contract, has been for the last 12 years about. The last 2 years, we've not been collecting revenue. We've been in the discussions with DART of transferring that over to DART for benches and other amenities at stops.
Okay.
It's never been a large amount.
No,
Very
it started out at around 10, and I think it went up to 20, and then it never escalated beyond that. Even though it was envisioned to go further, it did not.
So the advertising agency bought the benches and then sold the
They provide the benches, install the benches, maintain the benches, supposed to maintain the snow,
Yeah, that doesn't,
and then they sell the advertising,
okay.
and they get the revenue, exactly.
Thanks.
I like these bus stop improvements. I know that all of these on our presentation have been concerns of mine. But another concern, and I know Elizabeth and I have talked about this, not only snow removal, but the long grass on Hubble we have all these apartment houses, they all rely on, or many of the people rely on DART. And the grass sometimes is 3 foot tall. And when I've contacted Elizabeth, we've had conversations, and she said it's not DART's responsibility, it's the property owners. Well, the only way we can get it taken care of is I have to contact the weed commissioner, they have to send a letter, I mean, and a month can go by, and still nothing is done. It makes it really, really hard for people to, first of all, you have to oftentimes cross Hubble, that's not really all that safe, to get to a bus stop, but there are no sidewalks, tall grass. I mean, when I took pictures a few years ago, I got out of my car and the grasshoppers were just jumping all over. So snow and even the long grass really is an issue.
Yeah.
Sounds like that's an area where, for our priority one sidewalk, right? I mean, is that area identified on our priority one sidewalk list?
So there is sidewalk on one side of the street where you're talking, right,
Well,
on
no,
46th?
I'm talking about, yes, you go on out past 42nd. And there's sidewalk on one side, but not complete sidewalks.
Hubble's a road that should have sidewalks on both sides. I mean,
It's-
it's busy enough that, and the bus routes too, so it's something we as a
crossing is
city
very
should be looking at,
Crossing is an
When we
issue,
reconstructed that street, didn't we put sidewalks?
not on both sides.
but not there. I'm talking about farther out.
Further east. 38th has quite a bit of sidewalk.
Yeah, 38th is where
Past where the
it's-
new fire station is?
Yeah,
Right, it should
Yeah.
be all the way from East 42nd all the way out to 48th,
Yeah.
these sidewalks on
Pass
both
out
sides.
there.
But that's our issue then too.
but that,
Yeah.
I mean, any solution? I mean, what do I do next summer when the grass is real tall? Just call the weed commissioner?
Yeah, I mean, grass has not been something that DART has taken on, as
I
a
know,
maintenance
yeah.
responsibility. Totally acknowledge and agree that, it can be a hindrance to people trying to get on the bus. But it's just not been something that DART's taken on to do the grass piece. I think the snow, we can talk a little bit more about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because do you do the snow now, or is that something that,
So snow, we remove at most of the bus shelter locations. So we have a little over 50 bus shelters, and so we take on the responsibility there because we have easements to control those areas. There's a couple areas where like Grandview removes their own snow, but those are all concrete. We're clearing the
Yeah.
concrete.
Yeah.
Yeah.
but along Hubble, sometimes the bus stop is so close and the snow plows come by and, you can't even get to a bus stop.
Exactly, and that is something that we've heard a lot about. One of the things that we're doing this year is that we're going to try to work, recognizing that it is property owners who have ultimately the responsibility for snow removal. We're going to work with, we looked at, at least our highest ridership locations. We had to pick a manageable number, and work directly with some of those property owners to just help them. Because I think sometimes, especially when they have like professional crews that they're paying to clear snow, there's just not an awareness that there's a bus stop there. And if we could just say, hey, look, when you're clearing the snow, if you can make sure that you're mindful of this, leave 3-4 feet clear so that people can get in and out, we hope that can start to have an impact. But you're right, it's an issue everywhere. Everywhere there's snow and there's plows, there's going to be that issue.
And a
so-
lot of those people do contract, if it's a business, but the business is going to come in with their truck and plow the driveways and then leave. Because there are no sidewalks to shovel.
Yeah, I'm talking about just what we're doing for snow, kind of generally, but some of the specific locations, yeah, you're right, that I don't know what the individual kind of sidewalk clearing is. Yeah.
Louis, I got one, I think I meet with a group monthly, that's 7th and Indiana group, Connie sat on it and Pam sat on it. We got issues at that 6th and University. The group there has completely torn the bus shelter down. It's gone. There's public drinking still going on there, and some guy did an act that I can't even talk about in public on there. Is there any method of enforcement to do something on that? I know it's a real thorn in the side to that group in River Bend.
Yeah. So a couple of things. What we've done is that we've signed, I guess, I don't know, some sort of trespass order with the police department, where giving them authority to issue trespasses on that. The DART only controls, the concrete where the bus stop is right there. So it's limited, but that is, they say people are sitting on the retaining wall and drinking and doing the things that you mentioned. And so, so we did sign that order so that hopefully, they can address it when they see it. The other thing is that, we increased trash collection at that location. We're going, emptying trash there at least twice a week now, as we know that was also one of the concerns that the neighbors raised. And then, we're open to other ideas. I know that the bus shelter was taken down because it became a safety hazard. It was getting so torn down. And there's a question as to, what goes back. It is a very highly used location, so we would like to see a customer amenity there, but we know that it has to be durable, and maybe some of the other, neighboring problems need to be addressed before it makes sense to put, if it's a bench or if it's a shelter or whatever it is, back, because we would eventually like to see something there. Everybody else shouldn't have to suffer because of those, those individuals who are not respecting it. Yeah.
But, yeah, I'll send an invitation for next Friday. It's coming up, if you wouldn't
Yeah,
mind
I've been on a
seeing
few of them. I would appreciate it. I'm not always in the loop ahead of time. Sometimes Brianne forwards
Okay.
it kind of the last minute. But yeah, if I knew when it was, we could certainly continue to hash it out.
And do want to give you a nice shout out. Very few things get much of a buzz going around Beaverdale than that bus shelter on Urbandale.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you got the president that wants to do something this afternoon. You think you can swing it?
Well, it's not going to be that quick. I appreciate the enthusiasm. We're going to look at it, and we'll get a little tighter on the timing so that we can.
Well, it came in a close second to Fairway, so you really did a good job.
Okay, good. I'm glad there's excitement around that. In addition to just bus shelters for shelter's sake, increasingly we want to look at them as opportunities for public art. This is where art is really kind of painted in between the panels of the glass to try to make it durable. And we work with local artists. We now have our first one that was installed on University, actually in collaboration with the beautiful streetscape project that went in there in front of Drake. And so that was the first one that went in. Actually, over the next really just couple of weeks, we should see the shelters going in on 6th Avenue, as well as an additional Drake shelter. And so those are things that have been a while in the making. We were granted some funds from Bravo, as well as using some of those designated Center Street parking garage funds that were designated for shelters to be able to support this. And so we have plans for expansion. Roosevelt, in the Roosevelt Cultural District on 42nd Street, there are also plans. We have art that we have now, and in the process of finalizing the art to do ones there. And then even in our other member communities will be not far behind. Johnston and Windsor Heights probably the next to come along. And so this is something that we hope is generating a lot of excitement around DART and around placemaking and really opportunities to incorporate art in our facilities.
Just as a reminder, the Public Art Foundation is responsible for helping make decisions. I know I sit on that board, and in the 6th Avenue corridor, there was lots of involvement, there were meetings, and that went really well. But the 42nd Street, that caused some hiccups within the board members. So
Yeah.
please just be sure to include Elizabeth Rowe in those discussions.
Yep. Yeah, we know there's a lot of strong feelings around this work, and one of the things we've realized is that we need to slow down and touch all those bases and be very careful and thoughtful with that art process.
Please do.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
We just want to mention the art, working with the Iowa Arts Coalition to minimize that.
Yeah, thank you. So one of the concerns that we heard from the Public Art Foundation was around that process of how art is identified and developed, how artists are identified. And so what we did is we worked with the Iowa Arts Council on a call so that we could get, any artist who's interested. Instead of taking these one by one, as we had started out doing, we did a call so that we could establish kind of a library of artists who had been pre-vetted. and the Public Art Foundation was involved in that vetting, so that when the individual neighborhood groups or member communities start to pursue the individual shelters, they're relying on a list of vetted artists from a starting point. So that was something that we did over the summer in order to try to start to get at that concern. We've also been expanding access for those who ride Dart and those who need Dart and want to ride Dart. Appreciate the partnership working with the city of Des Moines to, in particular, identify residential properties where it makes sense to have that direct link between the provision of housing and access to transit. We've been able to work with Newberry Living and Conlin Properties to provide Dart passes for their residents. And so that is something that we've already seen a huge response to, where we're seeing a lot of ridership because we can track those passes and see not the individual, but at least how many are riding. And that has quickly become one of our highest kind of sub-user groups like this. And so it's important not only as we think about opportunity in our region and connecting housing and jobs, as I've talked about, but also honestly for Dart ridership. And the more we can reduce those barriers to ridership, the better it's going to be, and it's going to support those transit recommendations that I started out with.
I just want to point out, I mean, everyone here was a part of making that Newberry partnership work, because that was something that we included in our development agreement. And it's been, I think, a really good example of, if we think about it, what we can do, because I think it's served. I've gotten really good feedback from the folks at Newberry. I think it's serving their residents well. It's working for Dart. So we just need to be mindful and think about some of these things up front, but I think there's real potential benefit there.
I would agree with that, Josh. There's a fairly new resident to Des Moines that has been coming to city council meetings almost every week, and he lives in a Conlin property. And it doesn't matter where I am, I see him at a Dart bus stop. I mean, I've seen him out at Merle Hay, I've seen him in Windsor Heights. It seems like wherever I'm driving down the street, I'll see him waiting to get on the Dart. So it's fantastic for people to use.
Louis, is this Conlin property, is it limited to the Deer Ridge, or is it any Conlin property?
I think initially it was just Deer Ridge, but it's good to have that relationship. We continue the conversation.
Okay. Yeah. I got a brother that lives in a Conlin, and that bus is his only route, so I'm just curious.
Yeah. Yeah, and it just kind of depends on, whether the properties are close to transit is a big part of it. We want to make sure that there's going to be options there. We can't just put a bus pass in people's pocket. We want to make sure that the transit works for them. Right, yeah, they've done that. Very briefly, I mentioned access. We've also expanded our half-fare program to allow for more people to qualify for a reduced bus fare. And so it started in early 2021, where previously it was seniors and people with disability who had access to this. And really we wanted to expand it to also people who are on unemployment, people who are receiving food assistance, or undertaking job training, and also who have housing assistance vouchers, that they're all now eligible for reduced rate on DART, again, providing access to opportunity. We also refined the application process to make it a lot easier to apply. And I'll pass it back to Elizabeth.
All right, we'll bring it home. So back in February of 2021, the DART Commission unanimously approved a new property tax formula that really worked to meet the regional intent of DART, allow member communities to continue to find value in maintaining their membership, as well as provide flexibility for DART to meet future needs of the community. The new formula does work to align the cost and benefits to DART member communities, and as the Commission worked through this process, they recognized that the end solution was not going to be a perfect solution for everyone, and the new formula is definitely a balance of all the member communities' needs. When we went through the formula process. We did, there was an acknowledgement as we got to the end that property taxes was probably not the best method for funding transit as we look long-term, or the only method, that we really needed to think about funding diversification. Balancing that need did put Des Moines over that 95-cent cap, and we appreciate the city's willingness to participate and understanding kind of where all of the other member communities are, and your commitment to funding the first 3 years of the implementation of the formula outside of the 95-cent cap. But the commission has really charged staff with funding diversification and recognizing the constraints that property taxes have, as well as the disparity in rates that it starts to create amongst all of the member communities. And so last legislative session, we worked on a proposal with the legislature for a hotel motel tax. And what we were successful in getting a 5% hotel motel tax specific for transit that would be above and beyond what is currently collected. It would not only benefit DART, but it would benefit transit systems across the state. And this would really allow DART to look to diversify funding long term. And so as we think about what the impact for that would be generating nearly $10 million of additional revenue for transit here locally throughout the region. Currently, we collect about $23 million between all of our member communities as part of the DART property tax levy. A $10 million additional revenue would bring that total amount that we'd levy down to $13 million. All of the new revenue would have to go towards property tax relief. So we would see reductions, additional rate reductions go in the range of 22 cents to 51 cents, and it would bring the city of Des Moines levy down to well below the 95-cent levy in it as well. So believe it's a good proposal and are going to be working at the legislature very diligently this year to see that, to hopefully get it passed. We were successful last year in getting it in the Senate and the governor's compromise budget bills, but we weren't successful in kind of pushing it over the finish line with the House. So we are being very intentional this legislative session to try and move that forward and reaching out to all of our House members. So hopefully we'll be successful.
Does that have to go for a referendum vote once it's passed by the governor?
It would. So if we were successful this legislative session, it would be our hope to be able to put it on the ballot in November of '22, and then that would allow DART to begin collecting revenue in January of '23, and then it would be incorporated into our FY24 fiscal budget. And last thing I want to talk about is our operations and maintenance facility. Our current facility is located just south of MLK Parkway between Southeast 11th and Southwest 11th and Southwest 9th. It is a facility that is located in the floodplain and it's landlocked amongst some really great new development that's happening in the city of Des Moines. It is undersized. And as we've talked with the Federal Transit Administration, they have not been supportive of continuing to invest in that facility given a lot of the operational constraints that we have experienced with the facility. And so we have identified property at Southeast 25th and Maury, thanks to the City of Des Moines and helping us locate that, as well as willingness, along with providing DART the property where the greenhouses are and the old Chesterfield School. There is also WRA property as well. So we have been looking at the design of this facility as well as whether we would be able to move forward. We're in the process of working on our environmental work. We hope to have that. We're in the process of doing archaeological surveys. As you may remember with the WRA property that's adjacent to it, when they built the methane facility, there was a archaeological resource identified. There is the potential, though, there could be additional archaeological resources on this site, so trying to understand if there are, and to the extent that there would, what it would be to remedy those. We're also have completed schematic design and are in the, waiting for our cost estimates for that, and hope to have those in the next week or so. And then we are applying for a second bus and bus facilities grant through the Federal Transit Administration. Back in 2019, we were successful with receiving a $17.2 million grant. We're hopeful for a second grant of the same magnitude. We will be meeting with the commission in December to review where we are with the environmental, the cost estimates, and working with them to determine next steps as we think about this project. So we'll have more information then. And so lastly, just appreciate your commitment to DART and all the resources that you provide to make sure that we're successful, and just thinking about the policies that you implement, the partnerships that we're able to collaborate on, and just appreciate all your work. So thank you. And
Elizabeth, question for you. And I appreciate the work of the commissioner, especially Josh. I know he's been working hard on some of this, and some of the other commissioners we've had discussion with. What's the plan if that doesn't happen?
on the formula,
Yeah.
well, I think the commission hasn't quite, we're very hopeful that it will. I think it needs to happen in order for DART to be successful. I think we'd have to revisit, if it's not, what service levels look like, and, what that, how, somewhere either something has to give from paying more or reducing what we have. And I think that would be what we would be faced with if we're not successful.
Yeah, there's a lot of ifs. I mean, there's going to a vote, getting it passed up there, that's a big lift. And I appreciate what we're trying to do. And then, as you look at the ridership from during the pandemic, when the fair and the schools weren't in there, and not to say that this is all of it, but I mean, you were 50% down. So the majority of that, is that the fair and the school, that 50%, or is that 40%, or is that 30% of your ridership between that time? Because I've got the statistics here from 7/1 of 2020 to 6/30 of 2021. Your ridership year-to-date was down 50%. That tells me we didn't have any school, and we didn't have any fair. Plus, we were during a pandemic, and I understand that, but what is the current ridership of the fair and the schools together? What does that make up of your percentage?
The fair depends on, the year.
Let's just take a ballpark.
It's about, we provide about 250,000 rides. So, I mean, it's about less than a month's ridership as a whole. If you were to look at any other month outside of the fair, we provide well over, or prior to the pandemic, could provide close to 350,000 rides a month. So
They participate at all with any type of, okay.
Yep.
And then
That's
what about
pretty
the schools? How much is your ridership for the schools?
On a daily basis, it's about 3,000 rides.
Year-to-date, what is it throughout the school year? And do they get to use it all 12 months, or just during the school year?
Well, the primary bulk of the ridership is done through the school year with transporting kids to and from school.
But can they use that free pass
They can
during the
use it
summer?
they can use it during the summer, but we definitely see the ridership on it.
Do you track that?
We do.
What is it?
I don't have that number right off the top of my head, but I'm happy to provide it to you. I can get it back to Scott and Jen.
Okay. So we don't have, I mean, there really isn't, we're going to have to, you're saying that if it doesn't pass, then you're going to ask member communities to pay more no matter what, similar to what we're paying? Or what, I mean, I'm concerned that we're putting all of our eggs in one basket, and it might not work. And then what do we do then?
Well, we'll have to evaluate either service levels or paying more. I mean, that will be the balance, and we'll have to have some hard discussions. I think we're fairly optimistic, given the success that we had last legislative session, and hopeful that, we'll be able to get both the governor and the Senate there again this year, given where we were last year, and really work to gain some consensus around the House. I mean, the one benefit with the hotel motel tax is that it is specific for property tax reduction, and there's one-for-one property tax reduction with it. And so given people's concern over their property tax rates, believe that this is a really strong proposal and has the opportunity to impact people, on the bottom line.
And I'll note, one of the things, when we went through this process, and it's been a challenge, I think, getting alternative funding for a long time, but our willingness to work on the funding formula, we leverage that to make this funding change the top priority for DART. And we've already seen some results by making that the top priority and getting that buy-in from some of the other member communities. It's no small feat to get something in the first year of a complicated proposal like that, to get it through both the Senate and get it included in the governor's proposal. So, I know that we've got a lot left to do, and there are a lot of contingencies, but the real key is to focus on getting this through, because that's going to provide the most benefit. It's going to allow us to continue with the service levels, and we know if we're having discussions about losing service, when you look at those maps, it's Des Moines residents. There's no way to cut in any significant way from DART without significantly impacting Des Moines residents. And so we know that's the best option, and we know there are things that are important to us for the long term that are, when you looked at that transit optimization study, those long-term enhancements aren't on the table without getting this done. And those are things like increased frequency on all of the Des Moines routes. It's thinking about that East 14th route that I know has been a priority for a number of folks on this council for a long time. We don't even get to have that conversation without getting this done. I think we can get it done. I want to give specific credit. Russ Trimble has been fantastic to work with on this issue. He's done a lot. And our suburban partners are bought in, at least for the most part, are bought into this. And so we're going to work, and I think we can make it happen. And we need to really be focused on making that happen, because that's going to be best for our residents and for the region for the long term.
Thank you, Josh.
One more question, Linda, if you don't mind.
Yep, no, go ahead.
Annually, Scott, what do we participate in DART? What do we do with as our levy is?
I'd actually have to, so we'd be at our 95 cents currently.
Yep.
And so that's got to be, I can't even think what that number would be. Drawing a blank.
7.6 million?
It's between 7 and 8.
10 cents?
So it'd be closer to $1 million then, because it's 900, yeah.
Seven.
And then we've also got the cash from the park and ride that we need to put in, because our commitment is above the 95 cents. I can get that exact number.
So that obviously for the next 2 years is going to continue to increase past the 8 million, and then next year we'll be at.
Correct. As the valuation grows, so does the 95 cents leverages, and we have to put
The funding.
above that.
But the funding formula now is going up.
About 400,000 a year.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that coming out of the general fund or?
No, the park and ride.
Okay.
And so
But when we run out of that dollars.
Right.
Then where do we look at for additional revenue? If we have to continue to.
That would have to be general fund at that point, or sales tax or something of that nature.
I thought the park and ride money was to go for bus shelters.
We had excess a few years back, and that was identified for bus shelters. But this year and next year is for the additional funds towards DART.
But we can't use lost funds because we didn't tell our residents, as we use the audit, that's not able to be used for.
It is able, but you would have to resell that to to the public, so to speak.
I don't think that's going to happen.
I understand. Legally, you could do it, I'm just saying that would not
So
be.
8 million, and that's going up annually for our ridership. 8 million is what we put in annually, and that's
Does
going
that sound
to continue to grow. I think it's probably pretty close.
That
I think
sounds-
we've
yeah.
had that discussion. Okay.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you,
Thank
Louise.
you.
We must move on. Next, we have our COVID response, childcare, followed by mental health and emergency rental assistance. Do you think we can get all three of these? Should we? Okay, all right.
Oh,
Childcare,
no, I don't.
okay. Okay,
Oh, it's on the desktop, okay.
Yeah, there it is.
You're great.
All right.
You're welcome.
is Lisa doing all of them?
No, no,
Okay,
just the one. And I think mine will be fairly fast, so. Yes, Lisa Krabs, Federal Funds Administrator. I was here last week talking about Neighborhood Block Challenge Grant. So I'm back today. We're discussing COVID response. So this is part of a quarterly series that we decided to do because we received such an influx of funding as a response to the pandemic. So this is just our way to keep it top of mind and remind you of what was funded in the past and results when we have them. So I'll kind of go through the same, I guess, structure I have in the past, just again to keep it consistent. But today's focus will be mental health and childcare for the programs that we're going to talk about. As a quick review, since the pandemic started, the funding that we've received has gone to several different types of programs. So the first series, when we gave you an update, we talked about small business relief in Dine Out Des Moines. The second presentation we had last July was rental assistance, mortgage relief, and homelessness programs. And then today, like I said, mental health and childcare is what we'll discuss. So this is the timeline, and I'm not going to go through every single point. It's more just to give you a visualization of how far we've come. You know, we've had a lot of, like I said, influx of funding as a result of the pandemic. We've had 2 rounds of the Emergency Solutions Grant, which that's the acronym ESGCV, and that's the funding that goes mostly to the homeless programs. We've had 3 rounds of CDBG or Community Development Block Grant funding, and that's primarily what was used for the subrecipients we'll talk about today. Also used a little bit for housing. We've received emergency rental assistance funding from the Treasury, and so Ann's going to touch on that a little bit later. And then also we received home funds most recently, and home funds were authorized through the American Rescue Plan. And those will also be for affordable permanent housing, but targeted towards homeless or at risk of homeless. So this is just, again, a high-level view of how the funds have broken down so far from all the programs. And like I mentioned, these are all the funding sources. So we have CDBG, ESG, the Treasury Emergency Rental Assistance, home funds. And then with the economic development programs, we did have a little bit of kick-in from the general fund and some private funding. The chart on the right is just to give you a breakdown of how we used it. So housing has by far been the biggest chunk, and that's really because the Treasury program was dedicated to rental assistance, so that's where we get such a large chunk of that. But other programs, about 17%, and today the programs we're going to focus on, about 10%. The mental health and childcare, about 10% of the total funding went to those. So, you know, there's a lot of good services and programs out there, but the reason we decided to focus on childcare and mental health at the time, back in, gosh, what year are we in? 2021, so late 2020, right, is when we started to hear a lot of people saying, oh, maybe I'm returning to work, but I'm having childcare issues. And we definitely saw an increase in mental health concerns. I think that's been consistent throughout. But so one study showed that, you know, let's see, the Center for American Progress said that up to half of the country, or up to half of the licensed childcare providers could go away without any sort of government intervention. So that's one thing we identified as a need. And then just looking at 211 local data, the referral calls for mental health needs drastically increased, especially starting in May 2020. So we thought those were important priorities to look for. So we sent out an RFQ in the fall of 2020. And again, this is, we initially started with funds just from the second round of funding, which was from the state of Iowa directly, but they are HUD funds. And what happened was we set aside about $1 million of that funding for these different mental health or child care programs, and realized soon that that was not enough money. So then when we got our third round of funding, we set aside additional funds to offset some of those who didn't get funding, because really there wasn't a bad proposal. It was more prioritizing and making the link to COVID as directly as possible. So, and then just a background, when we reviewed the proposals, we had staff from Neighborhood Services, Civil and Human Rights, and the Economic Development Office, all helping to kind of review those. So we got a lot of perspectives. All in all, we have 8 subrecipients, 10 contracts total. So Des Moines Public Schools got a couple contracts, and then Lutheran Services in Iowa have 2 contracts. But this is kind of a breakdown of the funding. It's important to note that most providers or subrecipients did receive what they requested. There's 4 that we had to adjust the contract amounts. And that again goes to either maybe the connection to COVID response was probably a little harder to justify to HUD, so we did some negotiations there. Or we had a couple proposals that came in that were maybe more facility funding, and this was really, we're trying to keep it geared towards that service, public service aspect. So there was, I think, 3 or 4 total that we didn't fund at all. And then Children and Families of Iowa received about half of what they asked for. Orchard Place received about half. Iowa Homeless Youth received about a quarter less than what they asked for. And Blank Children's received about half of what they asked for. So now let's go into who was awarded and what they're spending the money on. One thing to note is the numbers you'll see up here are projections. So we don't have a lot of hard data and hard results yet. A lot of the contracts just took a while to get going, and that's just for various reasons. But most of them are underway. So again, we don't have final results quite yet, but this is what was in the proposals. So the first one, Des Moines Metro Schools, like I said, they had 2 awards. The first one was for the Metro Kids program, and this is where 200 children will be receiving scholarships to attend that program. And it's for after school or out of school. And then also hotspot or internet access. So that was one thing, with the remote learning, it was a huge gap in service. And so they were proposing to serve more than 900 students with internet access so they could attend school, basically. Oak Ridge was another recipient. So they have a similar program to like the Metro Kids, but theirs is really geared towards 6 weeks to, I think, kindergarten age, pre-K, I'm sorry. And so it's just preparing preschoolers to enter kindergarten and create that equal playing field. And so they propose to assist 60 children with a scholarship to their program. The Grub YMCA, they did receive some funding for facility improvements. They did some HVAC mold remediation issues because those are directly tied to, air filtration and air quality. But then in addition, they did a summer learning loss prevention program, and they're going to do it for 2 years, but they proposed to serve 130 students per year. And in this last year, they served 181. So, and they also help a little bit with the resources for students who are out of school as well. A few more subrecipients. We have Iowa Homeless Youth Center, and theirs is a interesting model. It's kind of a mix of a like street outreach. So they were able to hire a licensed therapist that will go with them on their street outreach team to identify homeless youth and help evaluate. Yeah, that's okay.
I have to get my cast out.
That's okay.
Or I would love to stay for all.
And so that's where that funding was able to help them out, get that therapist on board. Children and Families of Iowa, they're going to use their funds as well for a therapist. And this is just to address the stress, strain, and trauma their clients have experienced as a result of the pandemic. Orchard Place, they're going to serve 400 students. And this is an interesting approach as well. They kind of have different layers. But one of the things they're going to do is go to Des Moines Public Schools and facilitate mental health groups. So kind of talking through with children, you know, their stress and hopefully getting them a little bit of mental health while at school and address the stressors. And then also they're doing a child care provider relief fund. So in the instances of especially like small child care providers where they've had extra costs as a result of COVID, they're going to give out amounts between $500 and $2,000 to address COVID expenses for child care providers. And then finally, we have Lutheran Services in Iowa. Again, they had 2 agreements with us, one for mental health and one for child care. So they work primarily with refugee or immigrant populations, new Iowans. And so the first program is really to it's more of an economic development job training program. And so they're going to work with child care providers, again, refugee or immigrant populations, to work with new providers and train them and support them, and then provide technical assistance to existing providers to hopefully expand the number of providers. And then in addition, they're going to work, they were going to hire a mental health therapist, again, to help with the stress and the transition, especially as it relates to immigrants and refugees coming into the U.S. during the pandemic. And then finally, we have Blank Children's Hospital. Blank Children's Hospital is going to hire a behavioral therapist with the funding, and that's, again, to address the stressors of the pandemic, especially to serve, you know, families who are having children during the pandemic. So a whole new layer of stress to add to that. So that's really, like I said, I just wanted to give kind of a quick synopsis of who was funded. This was back in January, March that all these groups were funded. So it shouldn't be any new information, but it's been a while, and they're starting to gear up all these contracts. So any questions?
Thank you very much, Lisa. Any questions?
I was going to ask, are we collecting any data on the tail end in terms of service provision? And
Yep.
When are we expecting that, and what's that going to look like?
That's a great question. We do collect data, so we collect demographics. We have to know who was served, what income level, all that, for HUD especially, but also obviously for us to know if they met their goals. Question of when is unknown, because all the contracts kind of start at different times. So like for the Grub YMCA, we have data on their summer learning loss program for the first year, but really most of these contracts are a year or 2. So we probably won't have really solid data across the board for a couple years.
Okay. Are we doing anything on the interim? I mean,
Yeah, we try to collect monthly, I would say annually at the minimum. It does depend on the provider, because sometimes they'll want to submit quarterly, and so we get reports as we pay out the reimbursements. It just depends on the provider.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Next is the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, and I think we have Ann in the audience.
You do. Thanks for inviting me. I really enjoy talking about this program because it's been such a fascinating experience. And, you know, there's days I thank Chris Johansson and days I curse Chris Johansson.
Does he do the same for you?
No, oh, I'm sure he does. I'm sure.
Then it's all good.
Lies, they're all lies. But anyway, just a reminder, there were really two big funding sources for this program. One was the Consolidated Appropriations Act that occurred in December of 2021. We call that round one. There was another one from the American Rescue Plan in March of 2022. We just call that round two. They have two real core similarities, and that is that households at or below 80% of the area median income can qualify. But just so you know, in our service area, 95% are below 50% of AMI. And so 95% of the families we've served, for a family of four, that's below 45,650. And they must be responsible for rent and be late for the first time they apply. The biggest difference between round one money and round two money was that round one required that the family have experienced financial challenges because of COVID. But in round two, they just had to prove that they had experienced financial challenges during COVID, which was an interesting differentiation. However, almost none of that matters anymore because we have spent all the money that came from both round one and round two that came directly to both the city and county. To date, in the city of Des Moines, 4,066 households have been assisted with just a little bit over $20 million. 75% reported income source at the time of application. So only 25% were not working when they applied.
Does the state still have funding for this, or?
Yeah, that's a great question. The state, there's a current something happening where the county forwarded $10 million to us, waiting to see if the state was going to push down the funding directly or if the state was going to push it through Treasury and back through. The state does not want to do it directly if at all possible for a number of reasons, but there's negotiations with Treasury right now about how to make that money get back to where it belongs. But ultimately, we expect to get a total of an additional $45 million to expend through the end of September. So we still operate, 45 additional million dollars.
Right, but that's for the county.
For the county and the city. So it,
We're part of that.
we are part of that. Yes, no worries. We are part of that. And so one thing that I did want to bring to the council was we have started asking questions of families. They're voluntary. Those are the best way to ask families under stress. And we are also engaging a research company that will be going back and interviewing families, both in-depth and short-term, on what are the barriers, what's going on now, how can we help, those type of things that will be much more scientifically accurate than what you're seeing here. This is just questions we asked, and I went through and pulled about a third of the answers randomly to be able to report to you what we're hearing from families. Why they are not to their pre-COVID situation yet. 26% because they were so far behind that they're having a hard time catching up. So even if they're back to work and things at this moment look the same, they became so indebted and had so many other problems. Interesting, we have some crossover from what Lisa was talking about. 13% report ongoing childcare issues. Can't find childcare. The child care is inconsistent due to COVID issues. They have to pull their kids in and out due to exposures, things of that nature. So 13% were having child care issues. 12% note that they have very inconsistent hours with work. We heard a lot from healthcare in-home providers, house cleaners, folks who do that kind of service work, that their clientele has not risen back up to the level it was pre-pandemic and that they're having a hard time getting enough work. 9.67 noted that they can't find a job that pays enough to meet their previous income. 9% note an overwhelming cost of living. And then the rest of them are smaller amounts, but 5% noted that they had a health risk that they didn't want to re-enter the workforce. We only had one who said it was because they refused to get vaccinated. So there was only one out of the 300 or so I pulled that had said that. And almost 5% say they have a physical challenge that makes it difficult for them to do the work that is available to them. And then we asked, because I was wildly curious, how long do you think it will take to get to your pre-COVID financial condition? almost 50% said less than 1 year, and then a little over 45% said 1 to 2 years. So people are hopeful. I think that's a great sign. But we're not seeing a huge reduction in the number of people applying. So there's still financial issues out there. I don't think anyone's surprised by that. But we haven't seen, and legal aid would be able to talk to this more fluently than I can, we know that there's more evictions happening, but we know that the fear of a massive explosion in evictions did not happen. And we believe it's because this program was so effective in getting on board, getting people connected. And I'm sure you heard that the Treasury noted your program as one of the top 8 in the country, highest effective. We moved the money faster than any entity in the rest of the country. So we were pretty happy about that because we felt we were slow. At times we were like, this is painfully slow, and then we found out we were the faster. In fact, round 1 money, there's been 2 rounds, nationwide still less than half that money has been distributed. So congratulations to the city and the county and Impact for forming partnerships that have been extraordinarily effective. It's been something.
We wouldn't have done this without our partner.
Well, and us without ours, and so thank you, and thanks for the opportunity, even though I can't believe I said yes.
So Ann, as you implement this, is there any type of employment requirement for folks that are getting a subsidy, or do they have to apply for jobs? Do they have to show you they've been applying?
No. One way that we look at it, there's a couple different ways Impact approaches the programming we do. The first one is to recognize that families in financial difficulty have incredible amounts of stress and strain on the bandwidth of their family. And so we always look at a program that's been designed, whether it was by the feds or by the Treasury, which these both were, and say, we're not going to add anything. If this is what the legislator said, and because when you look at it, it's really an economic development piece as much as it is a homeless prevention piece, to be able to get as much money flowing back into the economy as possible to help landlords and the tenants. So it has nothing like that. I mean, the program is designed to just say, do you qualify economically? And do you have a need? And we're going to help you fill it. I think one of the best things about it is you can work and get this. I mean, therefore, 75% of the families are. And it makes sense to me that 25% are not working, because the folks who are still really struggling to get the right kind of work are the people coming for this kind of program. So even though our unemployment rates are almost to where they were pre-pandemic, our kinds of programs are the ones where we see the folks who are having the hardest time either getting or keeping employment. We did have a number of people say they have a hard time themselves. They've been applying, but due to something on their resume, whether it is previous incarcerations, whether it was previous issues with employment, that they are still having a hard time. I've had one guy, because we could see what they write, and one person said, I apply to 6 places a week. I've had 5 interviews. No one will hire me. And so,
Did he work before the pandemic?
No, now.
Yeah,
now.
but with pre-pandemic, did he have a job? Did he work?
Almost all the people that we've helped were in the either employed before. The only people we're seeing in this program that we were seeing before that have exactly the like circumstances are people on long-term disability, which is population that none of us have an answer for yet on how to help them get housing. But we couldn't, with the first round of funding, because that's what we're back to. The funding that we're getting from the state will all be first round funding. They have to show income loss due to COVID. So if they weren't employed before COVID, that we can't help them, because they can't indicate that they lost funding. So that's...
Okay. Thank you.
And one problem that I've encountered in my ward is that I know of several families that have green cards. They're here working, and because of COVID, in one situation, the earner of the income got COVID. They've had trouble with paying rent. And I've sent them to Impact, but they are really hesitant to come forward Because, and what I was told, the exact words were, if we're afraid that if the government finds out that we're receiving any kind of assistance, that they will deport us. And I've said, that's not going to happen. In a couple of situations, I've sent them to, and I don't have the name, but it was a Hispanic group.
Well,
That was
Spanish
that-
helpline's super helpful in those situations. The Spanish helpline is one of our subcontractors.
I just could not convince them.
It is extraordinarily, we've tried everything, because we can even tell people now, and we should tell them, we just did the big demographic report for the first time. They ask for addresses, they do not ask for names.
I
They don't
tell
ask for
them
any
that.
identifier at all.
But we just
We
need-
ask for ID just to make sure that we can prevent as much fraud as possible, but it can be any ID. It could be a library card, it can be any ID.
I just feel so helpless.
It's
when-
very difficult. Mm-hmm.
When I see these people that are struggling, already very difficult, and then they need the assistance they would, they could get, but they're afraid. They are,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
they live in fear.
Right, and we've seen people
that's
actually,
horrible.
they won't go to eviction court. Folks in that exact same situation will not go to eviction court, and if you don't show up to eviction court, you have no hope. But they're very afraid of that as well. But our program does nothing, there is nothing that should ever in any way affect someone's
We
stature.
just need to get that word out.
Yeah, like I said, we've been working with the Spanish hotline. They've not been able to, Spanish language helpline, they've not been able to convince people to go to court. Because that's super scary, right? But there's also nothing that happens at eviction court that notifies ICE or anything like that. But it's a real fear people have, but it's definitely not something that we have any issue with assisting with, because there's no rules about it. So,
I just wanted to get that word out, if people are listening, that you
Yeah.
don't have to be afraid.
Yeah, and we'll reach out to our partners again that reach that specific set of communities. Because the other thing that people worry about is there was some legislation recently around ward of the state, that if you get any sort of assistance, that can block you from a green card or citizenship in the future because you accepted public assistance. This particular program, it's very clear in the legislation that none of that matters really during COVID, so.
If I could, Linda, just real quick, in the mayor's absence, I know he is so appreciative of what Ann and Impact have done, and the insight and understanding of how important it was in that first round to get those funds directly,
Yeah.
because it allowed us to work with
And quick.
Impact and very quickly. And man, did it ever show. I know comparatively, we did fabulous and were recognized again as one of the best in the country. But it meant so much to the mayor to be able to see that was occurring in a very quick and efficient way, and that's thanks to Impact as well. So,
Well, I think
the
him,
mayor
because
sends his
I
thank you as well.
doubted that really strongly in the beginning.
We
And
all
I
we
was-
all did.
I was very wrong, because I really underestimated the inability of large bureaucracies to do their work. But we've seen it across the entire country, and that I would love to say there's magic in nonprofit, so.
There is.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Thank
It's
you.
something we want to emulate.
Thank
Any other
you.
questions for Ann? It looks like we're ending right on time.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you,
It's been
Ann.
great.
I think Josh had some.
Yes.
I just want to get a slightly better sense of timeline on some of the additional dollars and what that's going to mean. I mean, clearly, you already noted that there's the because of COVID piece, but do we have people lined up? I mean, I assume we're not going to have trouble getting those dollars out the door?
No, sir, no. I mean, we have to get them out by the end of September, and, with the 45 million, we shouldn't have any problem. What I'm really looking for is how we can claw back round 2 after we're done with round 1, because there's a lot of jurisdictions they haven't got their round 1 out, so they're not going to get their round 2 out, and round 2 would allow us to build a very robust program around income challenges and work challenges that has more money for case managers and all the things we'd all love to see, but we won't be able to do any of that unless we can get round 2 money.
Right, so things that we could do that would provide stability for a long time in our community.
Yeah.
How can we be helpful in getting round two? You don't have to-
I think we won't know about clawback on round two for about a year, probably. But I'm guessing there's going to be funds. I'm hopeful that there'll be round two funds. The state did apply for round two after a lot of advocacy work, so they will have round two funds, but we need more round two funds, but we won't be able to get it till they can claw back.
It sounds like that message might be to keep the money in housing assistance, to not let those funds from the other jurisdictions just.
They won't. In fact, legislatively, they can't. And
Well, at the
so-
moment, right?
At the
So
moment.
make sure-
Yeah, we really want to advocate that they keep that money, yes, thank you, in this housing program so that it will build long-term, it's an opportunity to build that long-term stability. So, thank you all.
Thank you.
Well, please identify, let us know how.
Oh, I promise I will.
With that,
Thank you, Bill Gray, for being on our board.
our meeting is over. Oh.
And I can talk to you later.